This is the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, Austria. One of the world's great art museums, housing a magnificent collection of old masters' works, along with many other exhibits. It is located on the Maria Theresienplatz, which has a big statue of Empress Maria Theresa at the center. The Art History Museum's Renaissance Revival structure was built between 1871 and 1891, based on a nearly identical plan to the Naturhistorisches Museum, the Natural History Museum directly across the square, that was built and opened at the same time. Kaiser Franz Josef had these colossal museums constructed on the new Ringstrasse to display the Habsburgs' giant collections. Right in the entryway is Georg Baselitz's Monumental 3, a contemporary installation in this historical art museum. While it was finished in 2013, it was inspired by medieval European carvings, African sculpture, and folk art. The origins of this collection lie in the personal Kunstkammers and Wunderkammers of several members of the House of Habsburg. During the Middle Ages, several individuals began collecting unique pieces of art as well as natural curiosities. Eventually, these collections would consolidate and be displayed at the Hofburg here in Vienna. There is a fascinating display featuring selections from the Habsburg Kunstkammer, which are featured in a separate video linked in the description, so check that out after this one. There is a classy grand staircase at the center of the building to get up to the painting galleries, where we'll start first. The staircase is lined with marble, stucco ornamentation, and there is gold leaf on the ceilings, along with that mural called the Apotheosis of the Renaissance. That is Theseus and the Centaur, a sculpture by the great Antonio Canova made in 1805. This sculpture was originally commissioned as a tribute to Napoleon Bonaparte, but it was later purchased by Kaiser Franz II for the Temple of Theseus in the Volksgarten, which I feature in a different video. The royal lions guarding the staircase are also great. A young Gustav Klimt, along with his brother Ernst and friend Franz von Mach, painted the spaces between the columns, another historicist element portraying the development of art. And this is the rotunda of the Kunsthistorisches Museum, reaching a height of 60 meters, which is 200 feet. It looks like the space below the rotunda is now a restaurant. Alright, this is the painting gallery. Starting off with Flemish art, and boy do they have a lot. On the left is a portrait of the Archduke Leopold Wilhelm, the youngest son of Kaiser Ferdinand II, who collected 1,400 paintings, laying the foundation for this gallery. This is the Fish Market by Franz Snyders, made around 1620. A still life in which he wanted to illustrate the diversity of the, quote, treasures of the ocean. So there's all sorts of sea life. There are several massive works of Jacob Jordaens, like the Feast of the Bean King, depicting a Flemish folk custom on Epiphany, when the man who finds a bean hidden in a cake becomes the king of the feast, then gets to choose the most beautiful woman as his queen. Here's a hunting still life by Snyders, a fantastic Flemish Baroque still life. Here's a portrait of a young lady by Antony van Dyck, another one of the greatest Flemish masters, along with a portrait of the Apostle Philip by Van Dyck. This glorious room is the first of two jam-packed with Rubens works. Here is a monumental painting by the great Flemish master Peter Paul Rubens. It's titled The Miracles of St. Francis Xavier, which was at times displayed on the high altar of Antwerp's Jesuit church. This monumental painting of St. Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Jesuit order, at times would be switched out with St. Francis Xavier, which we just saw, at Antwerp's Jesuit church. This is St. Ambrose and Emperor Theodosius from 1615. Rubens depicts the scene where St. Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan, refuses the emperor entry to the cathedral because he massacred civilians. Rubens painted this altarpiece of the Annunciation just after his return from Italy, so it is modeled a bit on Caravaggio. This is the Assumption of the Virgin Mary, a fantastic altarpiece originally intended for the high altar of Antwerp Cathedral, but instead it was placed in a chapel of the city's Jesuit church. That's the Four Rivers of Paradise. The female allegorical figures are paired with the gods of their respective rivers, representing the four continents considered at the time. Europe is represented by the Danube, which runs through Vienna. Here's an Antony van Dyck, called Mary with Child and St. Rosalie, painted in 1629. And this is the Caledonian Boar Hunts, made in the workshop of Peter Paul Rubens, so it was a collaboration, as Franz Snijders painted the animals, while Jan Wildens painted the landscape, and later Antony van Dyck extended the picture on all four sides. Here's another Franz Snijders fish market from 1621. These paintings were influenced by scientific anatomical drawings of aquatic life that were being studied at that time. Here are Van Dyck works of the Apostle Simon and a woman's head study. And there is a satellite room full of Antony van Dyck portraiture. Van Dyck made this portrait of Carlo Emmanuel d'Este, the Marchese de Borgo-Manero, who was the Spanish governor of the Netherlands and the most important patron of his nephew, Prince Eugene of Savoy. And here's a portrait of an unknown young general by Antony van Dyck, which really shows the influence of Venetian painting on his work. That is the Vision of the Blessed Hermann Joseph with Mary by Van Dyck. This is Van Dyck's portrayal of the capture of Samson, which he based on Rubens' version, but here he depicts the ambivalent feelings between Samson and Delilah at this moment, instead of Samson's last struggle, as Rubens emphasized. This is Minerva Victorious Over Ignorance by Bartholomew Spranger. These grand old galleries are great, though the benches take up an obnoxious amount of floor space. And now we are once again thoroughly back on Peter Paul Rubens' works. This is the Lamentation from 1614. Here's a similar Lamentation of Christ by the Virgin Mary and John, produced by Rubens in the same year. It was part of a series about the Passion. Here's the Infant Christ, with baby John the Baptist and some angels. That is the Meeting at Nordlingen made by Rubens in 1635, commemorating a Habsburg victory over Protestant Germans and Swedes. This painting was intended for a triumphal archway, designed by Rubens for the triumphal entry of a new governor to Antwerp. This is the Holy Family beneath an apple tree, which was originally two separate panels on the Ildefonso altar that was at the Church of St. James in Brussels. And this is the Triptych of St. Ildefonso, commissioned by the Spanish governor of the Netherlands, Isabella Clara Eugenia, for the same church. These are some little Rubens paintings, which compared to all these monumental canvases are not very impressive. This entire wall is lined with Rubens' works. He had a huge output, but this is still unbelievable. That's Simon and Iphigenia from Boccaccio's Decameron novella. Rubens had help from Snijders and Wildens on this one too. That is Philip the Handsome. Not sure why it has that title since it's not 100% known who that man is supposed to be, but it is probably Philip I of Castile, son of Maximilian I. That's a haunting piece, a landscape with Philemon and Baucis from 1625. It tells the story about this couple who had provided hospitality to strangers that had been rejected everywhere else they went. These strangers turned out to be the gods Jupiter and Mercury, so they punished the corrupt world with a flood, while Philemon and Baucis got to live. And this is the Feast of Venus, celebrating the omnipotence of love according to the placard, and inspired by a work of his hero, Titian. That is a portrait of Giacomo da Caccioppin by Antony van Dyck. This man was an art collector who, as well as Van Dyck, passionately appreciated Venetian painting. And these are all portraits by Peter Paul Rubens. These are landscapes by Lucas von Valkenborch. The winter scene is quite similar to a famous Brueghel that we'll see soon. This is a portrayal of Archduke Leopold Wilhelm in his gallery at Brussels, made by the Governor's Court painter David Teniers the Younger. His collection of paintings is now here at the Kunsthistorisches Museum. Teniers also documented the end of a Popinjay shooting in Brussels with this one. It was part of a festival where Leopold Wilhelm had to shoot down a jay affixed to a pole that had been used in a guilds match. This is a self-portrait by Peter Paul Rubens. In this, he painted himself as being very courtly and high class. However, he apparently disliked courtly life. And here's a portrait of a young man by Frans Hals, who was born in Antwerp where Rubens lived, but his family fled religious persecution to Holland, so he is considered as one of the great Dutch masters. And with this 1706 bouquet by Rachel Roysch, we transition into the Dutch art collection, which does have one extremely important work. Here is one of the masterpieces of the museum, The Art of Painting by Johannes Vermeer. He painted this sometime between 1666 and 68, depicting a painter in his studio, but this genre painting is turned into more of an allegory of the art of painting. The artist also has a model, who is posing for him as Cleo, the muse of history, who inspires the painter and proclaims the glory of paintings in the Old Netherlands. There's another historical reference with the map in the background. It shows the 17 provinces of the Netherlands before they were divided into the North and South. And there's also references to other art forms, with the sculpture model and sketchbook. Vermeer works are genius and amazing to see in person, and on the same trip I got to visit the largest ever Vermeer exhibition at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, where they displayed the majority of Vermeer's small body of work, but it looks like the Kunsthistorisches Museum wasn't willing to give up theirs, so I'm glad I got to see it here. I like the poultry yard there. Here is the large forest, a classic Dutch landscape by Jacob van Roosdaal. There is a bust of Rembrandt built into the doorway of the gallery. This is a portrait by Rembrandt, the only Rembrandt they have on display right now. It's the Prophetess Anna from 1639, though this has often been regarded as a portrayal of Rembrandt's mother. And this is the Apostle Paul, which was possibly made by Rembrandt. However, it was likely painted by one of his followers. This piece is titled Beware of Luxury, the topsy-turvy world, in which Jan Steen utilizes a humorous image of a messy room and indulgent family to emphasize his moral warning. And that's a painting of a royal Swedish yacht in Amsterdam, where it was probably built. Moving on to German painting, this museum does indeed have a great collection of German art. This is the Stag Hunt of Elector John Frederick, painted in 1544 by Lucas Cranach the Younger. And here's a work of Lucas Cranach the Elder, who is much more famous, titled Christ Taking Leave of His Mother, a prelude to the Passion from 1520. These are portraits by Cranach the Younger. This is Paradise by Lucas Cranach the Elder, an interesting 1530 piece which combines different scenes of the creation and fall of man in the same picture. And this is the Stag Hunt of Elector Frederick the Wise by Cranach the Elder from 1529. He was a Saxon court painter, so he often had to do these documentary hunting scenes. This is considered to be the earliest work of Lucas Cranach the Elder, made in 1500, displays influence from Dürer's Apocalypse woodcuts, and this was made for an abbey here in Vienna. The portraits at the left and center were made by Albrecht Dürer in the late 16th century. This is the Torment of 10,000 Christians made by Albrecht Dürer in 1508, depicting a legend where Hadrian got a pagan prince and his army to become Christians. However, adversaries joined their ranks, so everyone in the army perished as martyrs. The artist even depicted himself in the center as an observer of these events. He's wearing black and talking with a humanist philosopher that he knew. Here is the Allegory of Salvation by Wolfhuber, a commission by the Prince Bishop of Passau, who is kneeling in the foreground at the crucifix. There is a small Albrecht Dürer painting in this case, a 1503 Madonna and Child. There's also a double-sided Dürer painting. This side, technically the back, is an allegory of an unhappy woman who acquired useless wealth. And on the front side is a young man's portrait that was commissioned by a German merchant in Venice. Wow, this is incredible! The Landauer altar, known as the All Saints picture. Albrecht Dürer painted this altar in 1511 for the chapel of the 12 Brothers house in Nuremberg, which was a home for old and destitute craftsmen. The home's founder, Matthias Landauer, and Dürer himself were incorporated into the painting too. This is an entire large room completely dedicated to the weird and wonderful works of Pieter Brueghel the Elder. He is one of the most famous and unique Flemish-Dutch painters, and there are plenty of great examples of his peasant scenes and landscapes. Here is part of the largest and most important collection of his works in the world. This I really wanted to see. The Tower of Babel, painted by Pieter Brueghel the Elder in 1562. He actually did two versions of the tower. This is the big one, while the other one in Rotterdam is half the size. The details between the two versions are quite different. In this one, the Tower of Babel rises over a city and is clearly under construction. There's also some figures in the foreground. This smaller canvas is the Suicide of Saul, depicting the fateful moment when the first king of the Israelites commits suicide after losing to the Philistines at Mount Gilboa, but all of that takes place essentially in miniature. This is the Peasant and the Nest Robber from 1568, which was based on the proverb of the bird's nest that goes, "Those who know the nest know it, those who rob it possess it." Here is a copy of the Massacre of the Innocents. This was made by the artist's son, Pieter Brueghel the Younger. The original painting, of which this is an exact copy, was rather violent for the time. While the painting is based on the biblical Massacre of the Innocents, this scene takes place in a Dutch town, similar to Naarden, where in 1572 the Spanish massacred the civilian population. This devastating event became a rallying point in the Dutch War for Independence. The Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II got a hold of the original and ordered the dead and dying children painted over, so this copy by Brueghel's son is the only version showing the murdered children. The original is in the Royal Collection at Windsor Castle. Yes, this is a classic. Titled The Peasant Wedding, painted in 1568. It's apparently a fairly realistic depiction of a Flemish peasant wedding. The bride wears a paper crown, and these guys in the forefront are carrying porridge dishes. I had always thought those were pancakes. This is the peasant dance made in the same year, portraying the opening dance of a country fair, which is intended to be yet another realistic peasant scene. Here's a great one titled Children's Games. Brueghel is known for these bird's eye perspective scenes, so that he can show complex crowd sizes. Over 230 children are playing 83 different games simultaneously, which makes this a pretty incredible record of childhood in that era. I also really like this one, the fight between Carnival and Lent from 1559. This is essentially an encyclopedia of Netherlandish customs, with every event that would happen in that time period happening at the same time here. This great piece was recently the subject of a restitution case between Austria and Poland, as Poland claimed that the wife of Krakow's Nazi governor seized this during the occupation, but the Kunsthistorisches Museum claims it has been in Habsburg hands since the 17th century, so it looks like it is staying here. That is the Procession to Calvary, in which he depicts a Calvary procession, with many figures going from Jerusalem to Golgotha. This is actually the most busy and populous Brueghel painting, created in 1564. The return of the herd is important, because with this work, Brueghel introduced the subject of a returning herd as a motif for autumn in Dutch painting. He was inspired to make this after his trip through Switzerland, as he saw all the herds in the Alps. This is another iconic Brueghel scene, The Hunters in the Snow, in which a group of hunters and their pack dogs return to a village, somewhat dejected because they've only caught one fox. There's also skaters on frozen ponds, which are fun details. Gloomy Day from 1565 represents late winter or early spring, so people are doing seasonal activities like collecting wood. It's also carnival time, so a child in the bottom right has a paper crown. This is the Conversion of Paul, depicting the story where the Christian persecutor Saul hears the voice of Jesus and turns into the Apostle Paul. But as is often the case in Brueghel works, the main scene is small within the grand landscape. And that's a little winter landscape with Bird Trap by Pieter Brueghel the Younger from 1601, which was also quite a famed scene. So the Brueghels are my favorites here at the Kunsthistorisches Museum. That is amazing artwork. Moving on to the second part of the gallery with Italian and Spanish art. There's a cool mid-18th century depiction of Schönbrunn Palace. Here is a fantastic portrait of the Archduchess Marie Antoinette, painted in 1778. She of course was a Habsburg, daughter of Empress Maria Theresa, who was married off to King Louis XVI in France, and later ended up losing her head there. Maria Theresa really liked this portrait of her daughter, and displayed it at the Hofburg. Here are two large works by Tiepolo from his Cadolphin series, depicting the turning point of the Second Punic War with Hannibal. This is the Flagellation of Christ, painted by Tintoretto in the last years of his life, when he mostly did works with mystical atmospheres like this. And this is a work he did 30 years earlier in 1555, titled Susanna Bathing. Here is a great work by Giovanni Bellini, an homage to Christ in the Temple. He painted this during his height of popularity in Venice around 1500. This is the Madonna of the Meadow by Raphael, an iconic piece that encapsulated the new spiritual thinking of the Renaissance. The Madonna is located in front of a delightful pasture landscape. Raphael was so talented, this is fantastic. That is a portrait by Titian in the center of Jacopo Strada. He was the court librarian to Maximilian II. This is an Ecce Homo scene painted by Titian in 1543. An Ecce Homo, or painting of Christ wearing the crown of thorns, was more of a Flemish subject matter, so this Venetian-Italian version is rather rare. This is the Madonna of the Cherries by Titian, made sometime between 1516 and 1518. There's a Tiepolo portrait of St. Catherine on the right. These are fascinating works by Giuseppe Arcimboldo, made in the 1560s and 70s. He created several revolutionary surreal portraits of figures composed entirely out of fruits, vegetables, and other objects. This one is part of a series called The Four Seasons. He's made out of all sorts of seasonal vegetables. And the one on the left is winter. They have two of the four seasons here at the Kunsthistorisches Museum. Although I think my favorite here is water from the Four Elements series. This guy is made entirely out of fish, shells, corals, and crustaceans. Again, this was made in the 1560s. There is an important grouping of Spanish royal portraits by Diego Velázquez, the famed court artist of King Philip IV. His second wife was a Habsburg, so they sent these portraits to Vienna so the rest of the family could see what the kids look like, and to discuss marriage prospects. That is a portrait of the 8-year-old infant Margarita in a blue dress painted in 1659. Velázquez made this portrait of the king's young daughter just a year before his death. There are unusual shimmering spots of color that almost create an impressionistic effect when you see it in person. It's pretty neat. Here's an earlier 1656 portrait of the Infanta Margarita at 5 years old. He painted this around the same time as Las Meninas, in which Margarita is also depicted. And here is a 1654 portrait of Margarita, the firstborn child of King Philip IV and his second wife Mariana of Austria. Here's a portrait of the infant Maria Theresa from 1652, the daughter of Philip IV and his first wife Isabel of France. Just 8 years after this portrait was done, she was married off to her cousin, King Louis XIV of France. And this is a 1659 portrait of little Philip Prosper, a son of Philip IV who was actually really sickly, but at the time this was painted he was the sole heir to the Spanish crown, so he's depicted in good shape. However, he died 2 years later at the age of 4. Here's the Allegory of Vanitas by Antonio de Pareda. A lot of gallery space is currently occupied by a Georg Baselitz exhibition, comparing the expressive and figurative German painter's inverted nudes to historic depictions of nudity. I thought this was a bit repetitive and took up a lot of space. It seems that the famous Caravaggias were taken off display for it. This is interesting though. They juxtaposed Lucas Cranach the Elder's The Fall, a 1510 portrait of Adam and Eve, to one of Baselitz's nude finger paintings from the 1970s. And now we'll head into the Egypt exhibit, which should be great. I do appreciate the custom entrance doorway sculptures. And the fantastic theming continues inside the exhibit. This whole room is covered in Egyptian patterns and motifs, supported by replica columns. Now that is some great exhibit design. It feels like you're in an Egyptian tomb. This is the sarcophagus of Nesh-Shu Tefnut. The texts all along the sarcophagus are excerpts from the Book of Caverns, an ancient story that describes the journey of the sun god through the underworld. They have no short supply of mummies here at the Kunsthistorisches Museum. These coffins are richly decorated. No matter how many mummy coffins I come across, they never fail to impress. These are the coffins of Hor and Ta-Erdis from the Ptolemaic period. That's the lid of a sarcophagus from 600 BCE. It says on it that the woman entombed in there was the great wife of a king. This is pretty interesting. You can see the outer and inner coffins of a boy. The outer coffin did have a gilded face mask right there, but it was torn off at some point. Here's the sarcophagus of Pa de Pep. Several gods' names are invoked on it, asking them to protect the sarcophagus and the person in it. I don't think that worked as hoped in the long run. There are some more classic mummy masks. This is the chapel of Ka Nin Nisat, which was discovered during an Austrian excavation in Giza's Western Cemetery in 1913, and they brought this cold chamber of the chapel to Vienna. And this is the inner coffin of Mary Ib, from the same cemetery in Giza as the chapel. There's some bones, and a false door from a tomb. This coffin has a pair of eyes of Horus on it, a sign of protection and prosperity. I like this blue ceramic hippopotamus, considered a symbol of regeneration in the afterlife, so they were popular tomb necessities. That was made over 4,000 years ago. This is the coffin of Merit an Ahet, the Chantress of Iris from the New Kingdom period a bit over 3,000 years ago. This is the Book of the Dead, a compilation of spells for the deceased to enter the underworld, written on papyrus around 1000 BCE. Here are some animal mummies. The Egyptians did the same mummification process to all kinds of treasured pets, such as crocodiles. Those are ancient crocodile mummies. Here is a sculpture of Mahes, a lion-headed deity. Here's a case full of shoptis, small mummy-shaped figurines that were placed in tombs to perform tasks demanded by the deceased. Here are various ancient pots and vessels. This is the basin of an inner coffin made sometime between the 6th and 8th centuries BCE. And there are some head sculptures made for tomb steels, which were not designed to resemble the individuals they represented. This is a Neo-Babylonian lion made of glazed bricks. Lions like this decorated a long avenue between the Ishtar Gate at Babylon and the temples of the city center. The Egyptian collection is really extensive with thousands of artifacts. There's so much to take in. Although it does appear that several rooms of the Egyptian gallery are closed off for renovation. They have a famous statue of King Thutmose III that's usually on display back there. We'll have to see that next time. There are other exhibits here, such as the Greek and Roman displays. The museum's even known for an extensive coin collection, but I ran out of time to see any of those on this visit. The Kunstkammer took a lot longer than I thought it would. So that was the Kunsthistorisches Museum. Indeed among the greatest art collections I've ever seen, especially the Brueghels. That was amazing. A visit to this museum is an essential Vienna experience. If you enjoyed this tour, then please like the video, share it, and subscribe to my channel. There's also a separate video on the Kunstkammer, the Habsburg Cabinet of Curiosities here at the Kunsthistorisches Museum, that is linked in the description. I have videos on many other art museums, special exhibitions, and a variety of other types of attractions here in Vienna, as well as across Europe and the United States. Thanks for watching!